All right, we are now live. So welcome to Play Your Game with Alan Walker. I'm here today with Dan Nicholson, author of Rigging the Game. So we're going to be talking about that. But first, every single show starts with a 10-second dance party. Are you ready, Dan?
I am. Oh, yeah.
All
I
right.
promise you.
There it is. There's the turn. Oh, one more. I'll keep the music. And done.
My internal clock for 10 seconds was way off.
So welcome, Dan. Really excited to have you here. I've personally gotten a ton out of this book and the principles that you outlined here. And so I wanted to, give my folks a chance to hear from the author's mouth what's going on with it. So give us a little bit of a background on like what your history is before you wrote the book, and then we'll dig in a little bit to like what the book is all about.
Yeah, the backstory, maybe like a lot of you that are watching, I was the recovering people pleaser, always trying to get the perfect score on whatever I was doing. If my wife was here, she would add unhealthy to the word competitive when I would say I'm very competitive, and she would say unhealthy relationship with competition, probably, which is totally true. But I was always trying to do the quote unquote right thing. And whether that was in school, get the 4.0, whether that was then in various corporate jobs, what's the next thing I'm supposed to be doing? And what I wanted to be doing was be an entrepreneur and kind of set my own rules, but I had this contradiction that was going on. So finally, I made the leap and eventually had to unlearn just about everything that I had learned from business school and what I thought that would mean as an entrepreneur, which ultimately led me to writing the book.
Well, I think too, I'm a recovering corporate America guy, right? I worked in corporate America for 15 years and then started doing real estate, and then quickly realized once I was out of it that I never wanted to go back. So it sounds like you had a very similar experience.
Yeah, it's sort of like a prison sentence. You get sentenced to 3 to 5 years, 7 to 10 years in corporate America, and when you get out, you're like, I don't think I ever want to go back to that.
That's exactly it. So in the book, you talk about the solvable problem, and really much of the operating system that you outlined starts at the solvable problem. So what was the backstory, or kind of how did you come up with this idea of a solvable problem?
Well, I don't know. Have you ever done a vision board before?
I mean, I've done a Pinterest board. That's kind of the same thing, right?
All right, we'll count that. So I've had a bunch of different business coaches, therapists, and stuff over the years, and everyone would ask me to do some version of you need to put together your vision board, and what is your why? And I would struggle with that a little bit, put together it. Of course, I'd have like the guy with the 6-pack abs always on the vision board. That was like in the center.
Of course.
I'd have like Coach Taylor from Friday Night Lights. It's like the idealized version of like a dad or like leader in a business. I'd have all these like cliche things on this vision board. And I get all fired up about it and maybe get up earlier for a few days and
5 a.m. club, all that.
Just all that hustle and grind. Definitely buy into that. And then I would never really make any progress on it. And I would see, and I have the benefit of one of my businesses, accounting firm, and so I've the business of looking at thousands at this point of businesses' financial statements over long periods of time. Like, y'all are doing the same thing that I was doing, which is creating these kind of arbitrary goals and then racing towards them for a while, and then ultimately that sputtering out. And so this was sort of this experience that's going on in the background, and becoming more and more skeptical of, do these vision boards really work, or is it just a bunch of fluff that makes us feel good for a little bit? And it culminated with speaking at, and I'm sure you're going to be really upset that you missed this, the CFO conference, where I was speaking to 300 other outsourced CFOs. I could see it.
I heard Pitbull was the entertainment, right? I'm pretty sure.
That's the usual, yeah, the usual thing at the CFO conference. Uh, and I was presenting to these 300 or so CFOs, and they were all asking me some version of the same question. She's like, but how do you like keep your clients? How
Mhm.
do you keep your client? And I realized that all of us in the room had become commodities. We thought
Mhm.
we were selling some value add service where we're going to help them transform their business, but ultimately we're just another commodity on their clients' P&L,
Mhm.
because ultimately we were not connecting our work back to how we were actually helping the business owner live the life that they wanted. And so that gave birth to the solvable problem, which is, hey, you know what? These vision boards don't work because they don't actually tell us what our current resources are, how much money we have, how much time we have available, what we already have in retirement, etc. It doesn't tell us that. It doesn't tell us what the actual cost is to get the six-pack abs or the second house. And it doesn't tell us when we want to achieve that by. And so we can't really do much with it other than throw a bunch of energy at it, because it doesn't tell us here's how much more you need to make
Mhm.
to live the life that you want. And here's how the decisions that you're making are either getting you closer to that or further away. And so I built the solvable problem to go, let me help the client turn their goals, their vision board into this equation, because then I can show them, hey, when I just cut $100,000 off your tax bill, and that's going to apply every year going forward, like I cut off 20 years from how long it's going to take you to fund your solvable problem.
Mhm.
And that's actually meaningful. So you want to keep working with me because I can demonstrate how the recommendations I'm making are actually leading towards you living the life that you say you really want.
Well, one of the things that that you mentioned, either as we've talked or in the book, I can't remember where, but you in your accounting firm, you've worked with people with massive wealth, and like people with less massive wealth. But you mentioned to me once that everybody was really asking themselves the same question, and that is, am I going to be okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was what resonated the most with me when it came to a solvable problem, because at the core, I think it's what all of us are asking ourselves, right? Like, especially like, I want to retire someday. I don't want to work until I die. So like, am I going to be okay? How am I going to do that? And I think that there's real power in answering that question, or at least having like, well, if I were to be okay, like, what would it be? What would it look like? Because then I can say, oh, I'm on track to get that, right? It's like a true north in a sense, for like how you're making it, or at least how I am making my decisions around that.
Yeah, I think that was really well said, Alan. I do believe there's an essential question that everyone is asking themselves. Doesn't matter how much they have. Am I going to be okay? In other words, will I have enough to live the life that I want?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the solvable problem, then our biology is going to probably default to, well, you just need to do more. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, dopamine is the molecule of more. So we are sort of wired to chase after more things. And so when we don't know, when we have anxiety, we're not sure, the tendency is, well, I better get more clients. I
Mm-hmm.
better uh, hire more employees, uh, because we don't really know. But if we could stop and go, hey, you know what? I'm actually exactly on track right now. So the worst thing I could do is hire a couple more employees, because that's going to be more expenses. I'm going to need to get more, and that's going to get me further away. And so having this, I think about the solvable problem as a GPS for your finances that shows you, similar to Google Maps would, are you on track? Are you going to hit the destination on schedule or not? And if not, what are the shortcuts that we need to take, or drive fast, or whatever it may be, to actually hit that destination on time?
One, I wish that I would have known you like sooner and learned some of this, because I think in the real estate community, I've experienced this. I think a lot of people have experienced this, and that is, I was under the impression that to be successful, I have to be bigger. And so just going back to that dopamine, like chasing more for more sake, because that's what I'm supposed to do. And I look back at last year and I look at all the money I spent on employees, on systems, on, trying to find my own deals and marketing and all this stuff. And most of it came to nothing. And I think like I would be in such a better position if I just had the money, for like based on what I spent. But I just at the time I couldn't see what you're saying in terms of I was chasing someone else's dream, right?
And it was with well intentions, right? And the danger or what I see happen is people start a business, and you ask them, well, why do you want to start this business? And 9 times out of 10, or maybe 99 out of 100 times, they go, well, I want freedom.
Yep.
I want some form of freedom. You're like, cool. Yeah. Makes sense. Why do you want freedom? Well, what I really want to do is I want to be able to like go on walks every day. I want to be able to read, or I want to be able to have this freedom to go on all these vacations when I want. Like, perfect. Yeah. Totally makes sense to me. Then you check in with them a couple years later and you're like, hey, how's it going? How's the freedom? You're like, yeah, so I've got 20 employees. I haven't taken a day off in 3 years. We're going to have 10x in the next, 2 more years. And, then I'm going to go on this awesome vacation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah. So you're not doing it at all. Did your goals change? Like, no. I still want freedom. Okay, well, let's look at your numbers here for a second. How much would you need right now to have freedom? You're like, well, I'd need 300,000 a year. I don't know, making up a number.
Sure,
like, okay,
sure.
Well, you have all that right now. If we just cut out these 5 things, you could have 300 grand right now. Why would you not do that? And when they won't do it, either they're not being honest with themselves, or they're chasing some thing they think they have to do to prove to the world that they're capable enough.
I mean, that is a really good point, because what I found as I've, read through this book and I've talked to you, and, you have this concept of play your own game, which obviously is where the name of the show comes from. But I think what I realized was I was doing all those things because I thought I was supposed to do those things, and not because it really was me. And that is, I deal with this with my coaching clients all the time. Like, this is something that most of us struggle with, because we think there's only one way to get to success, without realizing that we get to define success. And that can also be pretty disruptive to the people around you when you start making decisions based on how you actually want to have your business or have your life, right? So yeah, that's a good point.
I think if you're worried about AI is actually the biggest argument right now to play your own game.
Yeah. Yep.
Because playing your own game is creating distinction. So if AI can generate a bunch of text for you based off research, then that's no longer your competitive advantage, just being able to produce a metric ton of stuff. Like, the distinction is what makes you different. Who are you? What do you stand for? What's your approach? That distinction, I think, has always been really important. There's a ton of evidence that if you look at the extremes, the billionaires of the world, they all pretty much played their game. So you look at the extremes. But even outside the extremes, if you're worried about automation and AI, then the solution is lean into what makes you distinct.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you say that. I actually created a realtor AI app called realwrite.ai. But it was really just, I thought, oh, like, this is something that's new, and I bet a lot of people could benefit from it, because the biggest struggle we have in the real estate business, especially around marketing, is it's content. Like, how am I going to generate all this content? And it's interesting to hear how people have kind of like, oh, like, this is going to replace people, blah, blah. And I've kind of, based on talking with you, talking with Nick Peterson, like, I've kind of thought, no, you still have to figure out what to put into AI to make it into something. And that's where your personality and your authenticity comes into play.
That's right.
So yeah, AI is a really fascinating thing. I tend to think that in 5 years, we can't fathom what 5 years from now looks like with AI, because it's so new and it's happening so fast, that it's just going to be a wild world. But I tend to think that, big changes like that are good, right? Like there's always opportunity in those kind of changes in the world.
It's just more of an opportunity to focus on where you differentiate. We talk about in the CCA, which you've gone through, which is only innovate where you differentiate. And
Yep.
so for most of us, say in the real estate business, you weren't going to necessarily differentiate on having a newsletter.
Yeah.
You were going to differentiate on something in the newsletter about how you work with your clients.
Yeah.
And that often gets missed. It's like, okay, cool. Now I have a newsletter. Now I have stuff I'm posting. That's great. Where do you differentiate?
Now going back to the solvable problem, can you describe a little bit more about how would you go about calculating it? Because, and just for the audience, so one of the things that really attracted me to the methodology that Dan outlines in this book is that, the idea of a solvable problem is a specific number. And that way, like, exactly what you're solving for. But coming to that specific number, I think, is a difficult thing for many people, because it feels like, well, what if I forget something, So how would you recommend people go about, or how'd you calculate your own solvable problem?
Well, first, you raised a really good point, which is back to the folks like myself who are trying to get the perfect number. When you're trying to get the perfect number, you kind of miss the point a little bit. And what I mean by that is that the number is going to keep changing.
Yeah.
It's not about getting the exact perfect number today. It's about getting close, what I call optimize, get close, so that you really can measure your progress. That's what we really want, is to be able to measure, are the decisions that I'm making actually contributing to getting me closer to what I want? So don't get too overly focused on, I got to get the perfect number, because as you get closer, you're going to add in new stuff. Oh, I didn't realize this was possible, so I've added something. All right. That said, I take the solvable problem and I break it into two components. Component one is what I call core priorities. These are what I believe everyone wants. They want enough where they can retire or not have to work. Maybe they never want to retire, but they want the option to work when they want to work. They want the ability to pay off any debts, and they want some amount of like cash reserves over and above paying off their debts in that retirement fund. Those are sort of the core priorities. For your debts, or for your cash reserve, that might be anywhere from 2 to 6 months of your monthly expenses. It depends on your risk tolerance, and it depends on just how stable your income streams are and how stable the economy is. So like right now, I might keep closer to 6 months worth of cash reserve, whereas 2 years ago, I might be more comfortable with 2 months, just as an example. So it could fluctuate. Debts, that's just simply what you owe right now. Add up all those balances. Retirement, you can get a back of hand number using something called the rule of 4, which is this idea on any given year, you don't want to take out more than 4% from your retirement funds. And so 4 times 25 is 100%. Not trying to show off my math skills here.
Slow down.
We can take the number that we want to spend. Say we think that number is, we need 300,000 a year. That times 25 is 7.5 million. 4% of that gets us back to 300,000. I'm just proving my work. I learned that in 3rd grade math. We got to go back and prove your work here.
Gold star.
So retirement, we can take 25 times our annual spending, plus any one-off things that are going to come up. Debts are just whatever the balance is. Cash reserve, something like 2 to 6 months. Add those together. Those are your core priorities. And then it's a matter of setting a timeline. When do I want to achieve that by? Then we have the second category, which is what I call our preferences, preference-based priorities. These are the things that are unique to you. I've heard it all from things like paying for my kids' college, retiring my spouse, retiring my parents, going on certain vacations, to like 2nd, 3rd homes, private islands, planes. There's really no right or wrong. It's just this is about you. What do you want? Being honest with yourself. And so when you add those two together, the core priorities and the preference-based priorities, that combined would be your solvable problem as of today.
I like that second part about the preferences. I think is really what distinguishes this philosophy from a lot of things that you hear in terms of like how to come up with what you need. Because yeah, everybody has different preferences. Like my husband and I want to move to Spain. Like that's our long-term goal, right? That's not everyone's long-term goal. And so the money that we need is based on our preference. Like we just decide that that's what we want. For many people, I think that they just have this idea of like, oh, it's a strict formula. And if I somehow like hit this formula right, then I'll never worry about anything ever again. Instead of like thinking like, well, what do I want my life to look like? It's a very like approaching from like working backwards from, well, this is what my life will look like when I've achieved everything. So like, how do I work back? I do have a question for you, and this comes up with a lot of people in real estate. We are always focused on passive income. A lot of us have rentals because we want passive income. I know you have rentals. When you're thinking of the solvable problem and this number that you're going after, how do you factor in passive income? Like, is it like I want 5 million making 8% a year, or you know what I mean? Like, because I think for many people it is a number, but it's also like we want the output to be a certain amount of passive income for us.
Well, back to the retirement number, the amount, the rule of 25. Say the number is 300,000. If you already have 100,000 in passive income, I would take that off the top, and so then you're left with 200 that you take times 25.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. And I guess if you wanted to say like eventually, like I want to have 300,000 in passive income so that I'm never touching my principal, how would you calculate something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would still start with the rule of 25 to get there, because chances are you're going to find that you need roughly that amount in real estate to get back to the.
That's a good point. I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay.
And just to be clear, because the mathematicians who are watching this are like, yeah, Dan, but I got like all these different exceptions.
Or maybe the accountants that are watching this as well.
Like I'm already generating 300,000 from less than that. Great, awesome. The point is to have a starting number, something to measure against, work towards, and you can update the numbers as you make progress. But what I can tell you from experience is the people who are the spreadsheet jockeys, of which I'm one of those, so no judgment from me, but of those, like, it's really easy to just live in the spreadsheet and spend a bunch of time messing around with that and then making absolutely zero progress towards actually fulfilling that.
Yeah.
So I call that optimize before you maximize. Maximize is like, well, I need to know the exact number of doors in the exact locations and what the purchase prices are going to be, and what inflation is, and what this is, and what that is. You're like, okay, so now we got 12 variables, all of which can change. And so you got a really cool spreadsheet with 12 different caveats on how we can't really rely on it, but how we should use it.
Yeah, one of the things that was brought up in CCA was, well, I don't know if it was CCA, it could have been somewhere else, but the idea that like the more you limit what the outcome has to be, the less likely you are to get there. So like, I like the idea of like starting with a solvable problem. Like this is kind of like what I need. Let's like start working towards that. But then it could happen in many different ways, right? Especially when it comes to passive income. Like it could happen in tons of different ways, rather than say it has to be single family homes. It has to be in the Salt Lake City, Utah market. It has, all of these like these restrictions that you're putting on it. I think being able to just say, I'm getting closer, and how I get there can change over time,
Yeah, I think having a nice detailed plan is great for baking, like making some cookies, the exact ingredients, right, for these cookies. That's great, because there aren't a lot of external factors, right? We mix it all together, we put it in the oven, we take it out. There aren't a bunch of external factors. But in the investing world, there's so many variables which we have no control over. And so we've been told fail to plan to fail. But that type of mentality can actually guarantee that you're going to fail, because you set this really rigid plan. And then because you put in all the work to build the plan, you're not willing to adjust when you get new information.
Yeah.
Ray Dalio has this quote where he says, and I'm paraphrasing it, where he talked about, I moved from talking about how I knew I was right to questioning how I knew I was right. And I probably butchered the exact phrase, but the point is, rather than justifying, the plan is accurate, how do I actually know? What are all the assumptions? And being willing to change your mind. Jeff Bezos is famous for when presented with new information, like pretty quick to go like, okay, yeah, let's do this instead, which is very much like startup mentality. And that's, to me, that's the recipe towards building something extraordinary. Is, you have an outline and you have some general ideas and some direction, but as you keep getting new information, you're adjusting.
I think that oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was just going to reiterate the same thing a different way.
So this kind of is a great segue into talking about business in terms of how can you use the certainty operating system in your business? We've talked a lot about Solvable Problem, which in my mind, it really initially, it's like personal, right? It's like, this is my end goal personally. I want to be here. But like, how do we use this in business? What's your take on that?
Well, I believe that our business or businesses exist to serve us. And that's a sort of important distinction, I think, because is it getting me closer to the solvable problem or not? If I know that I need, and we have an app called the Certainty app, where you put in the number that you're targeting, and you put in your current resources, and you put in the return you're getting on your investments, and it tells you, here's how much more you need to make per year to hit this date that you've set, this target that you've set. Well, if now I have a measuring stick to go, here's how I need to grow my business to get it to close that gap to funding my solvable problem.
Can I pause you there for just 1 second, Dan? There was just a question from Gabe. For those of us that joined a little late, can you briefly describe the rule of 25 again?
Sure. Yeah, the rule of 25. The rule of 4. The rule of 4 says in any given year, we don't want to take out more than 4% of our investable assets. The idea there is that we can generally, even in conservative markets, expect to earn at least 4%. Think about dividends and interest from bonds, etc. That's typically kind of like a conservative number. And so 4% times 25 gets us to 100%. So if we take our spending, say we need 300,000 a year, times 25, that gets us 7.5 million. 4% of that takes us back to 300,000. The point there is that 7.5 million is roughly the amount that we might need to fund our retirement.
Got it.
Hopefully that gives Gabe the clarity he was looking for.
Yeah, thanks. So anyway, sorry, back to using the certainty operating system in someone's business.
Yeah, so I start with, what's my solvable problem? What is the shortage that I have in terms of funding the solvable problem? And then I go to my business and I go, can I recover all those resources now without having to do more? So we have this overarching commandment that we're going to bias closer over more. More is not necessarily the answer. So I'm going to look and go, okay, given where the business is at right now, and in the book I have this whole exercise called cash flow engineering, which is
I've done it. It's really useful.
Which is just taking the principles and showing you how to implement them to recover resources. Because I want to see, before I do anything, before I hire more people, add more clients, etc., am I already there? Because my orientation is least amount of effort, least amount of risk, so that I have the most amount of options. So if I don't have to grow and I haven't taken on a bunch of risk, I have a lot more optionality to do whatever I want. Start another business, move to Spain, etc.
Yep.
So the starting point is, can I get there with what I already have? Oftentimes people can, because you look at, because they have a bunch of investments that they're making in their business that don't have a return.
Absolutely. I'm guilty of that 100%.
So in this cash flow engineering exercise, I take all my expenses and I go, what expenses are core? Core is what the business requires it to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And if yes, okay, I'm not cutting those expenses, or at least not now. Maybe I might look for a cheaper option later, but I can't just cut those.
Yep.
Then what is not core? Well, if it's not core, then it's an investment. I made some assumption that it was going to help me grow my business. So where is the proof for what we call preponderance of data? Where is the evidence that I'm actually generating a return?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, I don't have any evidence that I'm generating anything from this. It's not actually saving me time. It hasn't grown my revenue. It hasn't made my employees more efficient. Okay, well, that's a candidate for me to cut. Because say that I calculate I need a 20% rate of return on my investments to hit my solvable problem in 5 years. This is something the Certainty app can do. But I've made a bunch of investments that are getting a 0% return or a negative return within my business. That's getting me further away from 20%.
Yeah. I'll say this, I went through that exercise, and, you need to be able to be brutally honest with yourself when you're doing this exercise, which isn't always, especially as a business owner, isn't always the best thing. It doesn't feel the best, right? Because as I started asking myself, okay, if this isn't core and it's an investment, where's my return? And like the fact that I never even like thought about that previously, right? Like I just thought like, oh, well, I may need this, so I'll just keep the subscription or whatever. That's like, oh my gosh, like it's amazing how just like understanding what your business needs can also like raise the floor in terms of your profit, because you're just not spending as much.
100%. There's a bias called the mental accounting bias.
Mm-hmm.
We studied a little bit in the CCA program, and it talks about how we bucket our money significantly changes our decision making. And people can Google mental accounting bias and they'll find this Khan Academy video that describes it perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was within a brokerage account or within a crypto investment area, or it was in our 401k, we'd be looking at those statements like, why am I not getting 15, 20%, right?
Yep.
When it's within our business, we're not, and it's an investment, we aren't doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's bucketed differently. Oh, that's different. That's to grow my business. Well, your business is an investment. You keep reinvesting capital back in it. You're not hesitating to put 10, 20 grand into this every month, but you're not putting 10 to 20 grand into your investment portfolio because that's too risky.
Right.
How we bucket things causes us to be hypocritical.
100%.
Raise my hand and say I've absolutely done that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the way that you term it, cash flow engineering, I think also framed it better for me when I was doing the exercise. Because what I initially thought of was, okay, I've been through this before where like, okay, cut your expenses, like go through, like get rid of anything extraneous. But then once I kind of turned that, like I inverted that to be more like, well, it's an investment, so why am I not getting a return for it? Like then it just like all of a sudden it was very easy to say, I mean, it wasn't painless, but it was easy to say like, hey, these are not doing me any good and I need to get rid of these because I demand a return here.
100%. That the frame of mind, we have these different frames that we talk about in CCA and in my book, and being able to put on these different frames and go like, okay, right now I'm going to look at my business through the investor frame, which means I'm looking at it the same way I would look at my investment portfolio. And I expect my investment portfolio to go up and to the right. I look at these statements and that balance better be going up.
Yep.
So now when I'm looking at the investments in my business, I'm coming at it through that mentality of I want it to go up and to the right. And if it isn't, how do I change that? What needs to be different for this to be performing at least at the level that the rest of my investments are. And so it's like putting those on allow us to kind of have that perspective. It needs to become I tell people do that once a quarter, because you're going to slip. This is just part of life. You're not always you're still going to invest in other stuff and then look back afterwards and go, well, no return on that. Okay. Well, if you used to have an expense that you didn't catch for 4 years and now you catch it in 6 months, like that's a huge win.
Yeah.
Huge win.
Yeah. So you came up with a very robust system around all of this. How long did it take you to come up with this idea? Because it's pretty profound. I mean, it's changed a lot of how I've thought of things. It's changed what I want to do in my life, what I want to do in my business. Like it's really been powerful. How did you come up with all this?
I joke to my wife sometimes that it just took me 15 years to be an overnight success. I went to business school. I learned a bunch of stuff that I later had to unlearn.
Mm-hmm.
Not the technical aspects of accounting. I definitely need to understand those rules, but there was a lot that just doesn't apply to being a small business owner. And we've talked a lot about just the differences in maximizing for shareholder value versus optimizing for what you want. It's a totally different approach. So I have been fully self-employed for 15 years. For the first 7, I was like a hustle and grind. Just got to get after it, up early, last person to leave. I'm working Saturday, Sunday. I'm trying to 10X everything. And at the same point, I'm looking at all my clients doing the same thing. I've got all these awards and degrees and credentials and everything. I'm like, I'm doing all the same stuff they're doing. Yeah, roughly the same kind of volatility in our business. And so it was about 7 years ago that I recognized that everything I learned was built off of maximizing and not optimizing. And so I had to build an entirely different toolkit. That ultimately culminated in the book. So it took really about 5.5 years to kind of crystallize it into what was the first round of CCA, the Certified Certainty Advisor, and then another 1.5 years from that to turn it into a book. So yeah, about 7 years.
Yeah. So just for everyone watching, so CCA, the program that he mentioned, I'm a graduate of. It's amazing. I definitely recommend checking into it. It really helps you. I mean, I can say what it did for me. It really helped me get clear on what I wanted and who I wanted to be. And that sounds kind of like up in the clouds, but it's actually the exact opposite. It was like concrete, like, oh, this is what I want to do. And I'm going to make these decisions based on that. So I highly recommend it if you guys have a chance to check it out. How do they find out about CCA, Dan?
Yeah, the fastest path would be to go to certaintytools.com. And we have some references there to all of our different kind of programs, social media, podcasts, and links to kind of learn more about CCA. Yeah,
that's great. What else would you like to share with folks? What's coming up next for you?
Well, what I have, having done 5 cohorts now, or CCA, I think you're coming up on 5 cohorts now with CCA. It's sort of become more than what I could have imagined it would be in terms of the people that I've met and what, like yourself, what you've done with the teachings from the program. And one of the things that has kind of come up a bunch recently is becoming less exploitable. And I'll tell you what I mean by that, because I don't know that we've talked about this yet.
Not a ton, no.
So, I worked in the derivatives hedging space, hedge fund type stuff before being self-employed, and I know all the stuff about risk management and negotiation and all these sort of things. And I was in spite of that, as a small business owner, I was very easily exploitable. And I didn't even realize it because I had this arrogance about like, no, I know all this fancy finance stuff and how to engineer things. And, but in
Can you
spite of
define
that,
exploitable? Can you define
I'll
what you
tell you
mean
what
when you say, 'cause I think
tell
a
you
lot
what
of people have a different
yeah,
thoughts around that word.
yeah. I like to use language that's a little bit hyperbolic initially, just like rigging the game. Like, what does that
Shock
mean?
and awe. Yeah, yeah.
Shock and awe. Yeah. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. Okay. So as a small business owner, we get so much scrutiny and expectations. We got everybody, and especially from our people who love us the most, actually, who are
Mhm.
like, "Are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you like, have you thought about getting a job? It'd be easier." So you get all that, and then when something happens that's good, people go like, "Well, of course Alan would do that." Like,
Right. Yeah, I never doubted.
he always, I just like I said, joking, like it took me 15 years to be an overnight success. People are like, "Oh, Dan's just doing another thing." Like, of course, like, weren't you the same people who told me you didn't think I was capable? Like, now it's just expected. So we have all this external pressure,
Mhm.
and then internally, we're on this roller coaster where we think that when we start a business, it's just going to keep going up, and actually, it's all over the place.
Mhm.
We think everything's great, and then all of a sudden we're like, I don't know what I'm going to do in like the next 2 months. Like,
Right.
bills are piling up, right? So then we have all this internal shame and guilt.
Mhm.
And so as a consequence of that, this is what I mean about being exploitable, is that there's a lot when you don't have the right mental models in place, you don't have the right community in place, uh, you can fall victim to what I'll call the charlatans out there who have that one hack that you've been looking for. That
Right.
one step, those 2 steps, join this program. There's only one way to do this. And once you learn this, your business is going to go to the moon.
Mhm.
And because we're in so much pain, some days we have a higher probability of like, okay, I'm going to do it. I can't take this anymore. Like, I got to try something. Like, I
Yep.
can't, I got to bet on myself this time. So we are constantly making these leaps of faith on these 3 steps, 1 step. Okay, this is the next book that's going to give me the secrets. And that's what I mean by exploitable, is that when you don't have the mental models in place, when you're not clear on what you actually want, somebody else is going to come out there with their own agenda and sell you the solution to the problems, which is just going to be some other version of, there's only one way to do this, copy
Yep.
this plan, here you go. And then you get into it and you're like,
None of this makes sense to me.
I'm not getting the results I want.
Right.
I'm not actually willing to do the things that they're suggesting.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean by
Great. Thank you.
being exploitable. And I've become really passionate about that because I think there's generally two programs out there. There's the programs that are like, you got to bet on yourself, go all in, um, take all the risk. And then there's the others who are like the Dave Ramsey, uh, don't take any risks,
Mhm.
slow, careful. And here we are right in the middle, which is, well, I don't know. It depends. Like, what do you want?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
let's actually
Yeah.
get to know you. How can we meet you? And that's what you're doing with your coaching program and what you do
Mhm.
with your real estate clients, and why people should be talking to you and working with you, frankly, besides the fact that you are a great dancer. You're meeting people at their individual point of need,
Mhm.
and you're not giving them a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And you're giving them the tools, like you're teaching them how to fish rather than just giving, as cliche as that is.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that to me is the most invaluable thing, is that someone that can show you how to play your own game and actually live the life that you're destined to live. Because if you don't, the consequence is that you blow yourself up eventually anyways.
Yep. Yeah, I think the term that, like, the saying that comes into my head is, nobody wins a game they don't want to run. or race they don't want to run, I think is the actual term. But yeah, it's very much that. It's like I've blown myself up multiple times in multiple ways because I was chasing what I thought I should want and not what I actually wanted. And that's really the power. I mean, I think that you have to have a level of critical thinking to really implement the certainty operating system, because the answer is almost always, it depends. Like what are you solving for?
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that my coaching students like, is that they're starting to see like, hey, like I am like, maybe I work full time and I want to have rentals. So I'm going to do it a little different than a guy that's flipping houses and is full time in real estate, right? Like how's it going to work for me? And that's where the real power comes in, because once it's exactly what you want, like once you're working towards exactly what you want, it gets a lot easier because you realize that you're actually working towards what you want.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true. And the common reaction is like, wait, so I can do it that way?
Right. Exactly. Like, that's okay.
Allowed to like buy properties that way, or like I don't have to. Yeah. These things just exist to serve you. Like you get to write your own rules.
Right. Yeah.
You can't violate any laws, but the rules that people want are like not usually doing something nefarious. So yeah, you can do it however you want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are doing extraordinary things, the billionaires and stuff, they largely became billionaires because they were just doing things their own way.
Yep.
They weren't trying to conform. And I had to realize this. And again, I had to hear it like multiple times, or I experienced it multiple times, which is, how can I expect to do something extraordinary if I'm just copying everyone else?
Yep.
Because if I'm just copying everyone else, by definition, I'm just doing the average, and the average is not extraordinary.
Yeah. I think it's understanding the power of your own authenticity, right? That's really what like I've discovered over the last year is like, oh yeah, like I am goofy and want to do a dance party at the beginning of every show because I like to have fun, And so it's like, okay, I'm just going to do that. Like, I don't need to, nobody else, I don't think anyone else is doing it. It's like, I'm not trying to be like someone else. So, but the power of authenticity too, is that you really get to know, I mean, your relationships deepen so much when you're actually being yourself and not really holding back, because then you're attracted to the people that actually are attracted to exactly what you are. Right. And that sounds a little secret, like, and then I just manifested a yacht. But it's not what I mean, but yeah.
Yeah, there is some nuance there, and it could start to sound a little bit woo-woo.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the more that you play your game, it's just more sustainable. And if it's more sustainable, then you're not, because people will give their New Year's resolutions and it's some version of like, be more disciplined, have more restraint. And then I'm like, so how are you going to do that? And you're like, well, I'm just going to be more disciplined. Like, so that discipline this year, you're going to be, which is something you're saying you don't have. To do that, you're going to have more of it. Is this like a riddle? Is this like, I'm missing something? And you're like, oh, well, you know what? Maybe I could just put myself in situations where I don't need more discipline.
Right.
I could just be less impulsive.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're talking about, which is by playing your own game, you're just going to be more consistent. And when you're more consistent, you're going to get more results.
Right.
Playing someone else's game, you're not going to be consistent. So you're going to keep doing weird stuff, or you're going to quit doing things because you don't like doing it. And then you're not going to get results because you're not being consistent.
Yep.
That's take a little bit of the woo out of it. All of this leads to some feedback on the dancing, Alan. I feel like some lights need to be added, like some flashing lights, maybe.
Yeah.
Or like something that either drops from the ceiling.
Now that's something I could get behind that. Yeah, something that drops from the ceiling.
Something. So not that you were
my face on a disco ball.
I want to see this dancing like all in here, like really all out playing your game. with some lights, strobe light, maybe a disco ball. I don't know what it is. But
I'll workshop it. I'll keep workshopping it.
that's what we do in CCA Elite. So next Wednesday, come on, we can give you some suggestions on some lighting.
So Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and talk with the folks here that are listening. It's been a joy getting to know you and becoming your friend over the last year or so. So anything that you want to share before we leave?
Well, just to play off, getting a chance to know you, and which has been a total pleasure to me. That's anyone that's gotten to know you definitely knows that you playing your game is like a secret weapon. This is like the ultimate weapon. Such a fun person to be around. Always a fun conversation, intellectual. If people are out there looking for a coach, people are out there looking for real estate advice, you got the guy right here. You don't need to look any further.
Thank you.
Stop searching all over the place for some random people who are going to sell you some snake oil thing for real estate. We got our guy Alan right here.
I appreciate it. And if you are interested, anyone watching, in buying Dan's book, riggingamazon.com is the URL you can go to. That will take you to the Amazon site and you can purchase it. And then also, Dan mentioned Certainty Tools. That's a great site to check out as well. Dan, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
All right, take care. See ya.